He just edits out Chris and I so that it sounds like he's always getting his thoughts finished.
I go back and I overdub after we're done recording, like on the next day. No.
There's some ADR, some pickups.
Exactly. Why does he sound so different? I'm in my car, like doing a voice memo. And that's why Breath of the Wild.
Sorry, I might be rolling my eyes because my husband's already giving me notes.
This guy's been on 11 episodes and he's like, this is how you do it, trust me.
I'm literally just looking at the waveform. I'm trying not to make you have to go in and bump a bunch of stuff or lower a bunch of stuff. Like, I could kick the gain way up, but then I'm going to be peaking all the fucking way through.
Don't do that. Console, Crusade Podcast. I'm EJ Olson, as usual, Nick Durheim, Chris Gillifor. And joining us, a very special edition. What did I call this yesterday? The Console Crusade Wife Cast, the Partner Cast. Joining us is Lindsay Floyd.
Hello.
And Tiffany Gillifor.
Hello.
You guys have all been watching the show together every week, The Last of Us. We have been talking about this show every week between the three of us. And it's been interesting to hear little bits of perspective, from your guys' own conversations and how you guys related to the show. So we figured, let's get everybody on and give us a break from absolutely shit-talking each other. I'm assuming, Tiffany, you haven't been listening. Lindsay, I know you haven't been listening to avoid spoilers. And so we'll do our best today. I'll do my best to not spoil anything.
You better, man. You better, because I've been so fucking careful.
Tiffany, literally, like Sunday when we got together, I don't know what, we started talking about something and Chris was like, hold on, I gotta make sure Tiffany's out of the house before.
I appreciate that.
So, Chris, I'm gonna let you do what you've been doing the last few weeks and you can kind of get us into the show. We're gonna talk finale first and then look back at the last couple weeks. We'll get some interesting insight, Tiffany as an actor and Lindsay, our resident mycologist.
Right on. Yeah, we'll do a little breakdown and talk. And Tiffany, feel free to just like slap my face away from the mic if you want to riff on something, and or we could do the hand raise thing and be civilized. I don't care either way. So we open our cold open with none other than Ashley Johnson, the voice actor and motion capture artist who played Ellie in both The Last of Us Part 1 and The Last of Us Part 2, running through the woods, very pregnant, presumably from some infected, gets into a farmhouse that looks an awful lot like a certain location in The Last of Us Part 2, which maybe we shouldn't talk too much about now.
You're in the danger zone, dude.
I'm just saying, I just want that on record that I was like, that looks pretty damn familiar to me. She runs upstairs. We discover this is Anna, who is the mother of Ellie. As she gets into it, she's expecting some folks, and there are no folks, and she's in big trouble.
I just have a question, since I never played either of the games. This is the first time we have really seen or heard from Ellie's mother, and we never saw anything from her father as well. So this being a created thing for the show, how do you think this works for you guys?
I believe we got maybe just a note about Ellie's mom, right? And something about the knife, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. We know that the knife is Ellie's knife. There's a note that we can read in Ellie's bag. I don't remember at what part of the game. But it is in the first one. Do you have thoughts on the getting to see her, or thoughts on what her presence means for the broader show? Because I think that's a bigger conversation that I'd love to have, but I don't know if we want to go there yet.
Before we dive into sort of comparing apples to oranges here with the game versus the show, I just want to get some thoughts on strictly as a television program.
Just in regards to this episode, or
this opening specifically.
I mean, without having played the game, I had picked up pretty much immediately that it was her mom, just based off of information that we'd had early in the season, where it had been talked about that her mom had been infected while she was still inside of her. So that added to the drama in some way as well, because what type of fate is going to happen to her mom. And then, of course, seeing this actress, my first association with her is actually as Little Orphan Annie, so it's always interesting to see her in her grown-up roles as well. But yeah, definitely an intense opener for sure.
It was interesting to see the presumed origin of Ellie's immunity here.
Yeah, I just really like when, as a viewer of a movie or a TV show, I get to do some detective work.
It's kind of like a David Lynch thing he points out, but he's absolutely right that it's more fun to watch as a viewer when you get to do some detective work. And I didn't know it was her mom until she said Ellie. I think Chris said something that she was the voice of Ellie, and I was like, oh damn, she looks like her too, which is cool. But I love an opening like that kind of makes you go, what's going on? Where are we? Who is this? I really like the choice. I don't know how it goes in the game, but like, I really like the choice that, I forget the lady's name that's like her best friend who shoots her.
Marlene.
Yeah. I really like the choice that she just turns around and goes in and shoots her, because I've been thinking about how when I go rock climbing, if I don't just jump off the wall when I do like the auto belay, I get freaked out and I get in my head and I can't jump off because I don't trust the rocks anymore. I don't trust the belay. And so if she had hesitated at all, I think it would have taken longer, which might have been interesting for a scene. But in the world of the story, you have to kind of make that decision, a snap decision, or you're going to hesitate. So I liked that choice a lot in that scene.
The way it mirrors Ellie and Riley, it shows them making the hard choice of not putting each other out of their misery. Just sort of a compare and contrast, not really a showing this is the right way, this is the wrong way, but showing who they are as people, who Marlene is and who Ellie is.
I saw a little bit of discourse online. Well, the discourse around these games has been pretty rough, 10 years now. But it's interesting going back and seeing a lot of the same points from the game 10 years ago being brought up again with this finale. Some people were asking, like, why wouldn't we have gotten this sooner? And I think doing this now that we know these characters, and obviously we don't know, Ellie's mom, but we know Ellie and we care about Ellie. And so, yeah, if this would have been a cold open, we get Joel's backstory and then we get Ellie's backstory. I think doing that, it would not have hit the same way.
I completely agree with you for a lot of reasons. I think that front-loading exposition, while very common in a lot of prestige drama, television is not always necessarily the most successful way to do that. I think that a careful slow drip can pay off really well later. Case in point, that I've been wondering as a player of the game the whole time, if they were going to equivocate in the same way with regards to Ellie and the surgery and the others the illusion of others, that kind of pulled a punch. And I'll talk more about that later, but getting this information in this episode of, there is something that is different about her specifically in a way that is a departure from the game that I thought was one of the strongest departures that they made, was great.
I think non-linear storylines are more interesting than linear storylines, because like linear storylines are easy to predict and they're very Disney, for a better word. Sorry, Disney, don't come at me, but because they're definitely listening to this podcast.
Roasted. Giving the audience an opportunity, like you said earlier, like to put pieces together, it makes for a much more engaging and rewarding experience. And they've done the cold open really goddamn well this whole season.
Mm-hmm.
It's great to have a chance to think to yourself, like, who is this? And they're going to answer it. Although I don't know if when you guys watch together, are you like Sarah and I, where it's like pause every time we answer a question? You guys just
never pause ever, never, ever, ever. If we're invested in it, I would rather get punched in the face than pause a film or movie that I'm invested in.
Thank you.
We just pause to wash our hands because we eat popcorn.
Yes.
So it's usually about 30 minutes in, we finish the bowl, so we have to wash our hands and floss.
Understandable.
Dude, we have that with our, we'll make our, lunch or dinner, and we'll start an episode of, anime or something, and we'll get, 5 minutes in. As soon as we've, finished our food, we, pause. When we were watching Animaniacs, it was always, right before Pinky and the Brain started, we'd pause and, clear the snack dishes out of the way, and then come back and finish the episode. But not The Last of Us. Never The Last of Us.
So, Chris, we have this moment. The infected chases Ellie's mother. What's her name again?
Anna.
Ashley Johnson's performance here. It was so refreshing to see two people in Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson in the last two episodes who are only known as voice actors. I'm sure they've done on-screen stuff. I've never seen it, but they're in tons of video games. Seeing them both turn in awesome performances on screen. I'm invested, obviously, having played the game and been with this franchise for a decade. There's almost some anxiety knowing that they're going to be in the episode. They were showing promo shots of Ashley Johnson last week, and I'm like, All right. Can we go 2 for 2 here? I guess 3 for 3 if you count Marlene, in a much smaller role. I can't remember her actor's name, but she nailed it. And a scene where like she's only acting with a screaming baby, like the feeling I had, like you knew she was going to get bit. Like obviously she's not in the picture. Like we know what happens, right? But when they do the reveal of the bite on the leg and she has a brief moment of acknowledgement where she's like, fuck, like all of those things are processing. She's like, this is I'm going to get 3 hours with my child. And it was just this little moment of acknowledgement. And then she goes right into mommy mode and the emotion. What a way to open, man. Just frying the nerves.
Just to hear that voice in this context, even though she's obviously not playing Ellie in the show, she's too old, but to hear her voice at all and to say the word Ellie and to be speaking to that, it was like a really weird meta moment for me that made me really emotional of, yeah, she's talking to this child, this literal child that she's just birthed in the circumstances of this world, but also like low-key kind of felt like she was talking to Bella Ramsey a little bit and being like, you got this. Like you got this. You're doing a great job. And or to the role collectively, I don't know. It just there was something about it. And she was great. She was terrific. Fireflies finally show up and we get Anna's in there and has got the knife, Ellie's knife, to her own throat in case she starts to do anything erratic. Tells Marlene, you need to take the kid. I promise I got bit after she was born. It's fine. Marlene is dubious about that. But Anna kind of calls
that is a lie though, right?
Yes, it's a lie. It's 100% a lie. Which Marlene knows. Like you see it in her performance that she's like, I don't know. I'm not feeling this. But she agrees. She takes the kid. And then as Tiffany pointed out, a great moment of her going like, I can't kill you. And then just saying, I just have to do this now or I'm going to lose my nerve, going in and just pop immediately. So that's our cold open. And it's great. And like you said, EJ, it's sort of like cherry on top of a season full of terrific cold opens. So we proceed, we get back to real time and have a sequence of Joel's returning from some scavenging. We see Ellie pretty shell-shocked still. And I use that term really specifically as like the precursor term to post-traumatic stress disorder, that she is like clearly still pretty fucked up about everything that happened in the winter and happened with David. And of course, as she would be. And there's this sort of like urgent need to connect from Joel of like, hey, got beefaroni, remember? Which was a nice, like a cute little callback to the 20-year-old Chef Boyardee ravioli from episode, I think 6. And Boggle. Like, it's just a great little like dad thing. Like, oh yeah, you could probably beat me at this. I'm not really a words guy.
Like this is the first time since episode 1 that I like really believed Pedro Pascal as dad. It was so earnest. And I've been that teenager, obviously under very different circumstances, but I've been that teenager who's just like, whatever, dude. Like, I'm not here right now. And the earnest parent just trying to find a way to connect. And so I think it's a different conversation to talk about whether that felt as earned as maybe I wanted it, to have felt. But in a vacuum, that moment was really nice, seeing him earnestly trying to connect. And it was believable. And I don't know if you guys feel this way, but we've talked a few times, Nick, specifically about how they've really portrayed Ellie as kind of a weirdo. She has this fascination with violence. Every time we see a moment where she has to either be violent or is exposed directly to something extremely violent, her reaction is generally like kind of off-putting. Like when Joel's teaching her how to use the gun and then she's in the bathroom like pistol whipping, her reflection or whatever. And even after something traumatic and having to shoot that guy that Joel killed, obviously what we saw in the last episode was horrifying to watch, horrifying to think about, and obviously is a very traumatic thing. It was just interesting to have that buildup of her sort of the fascination with it and also experimenting, like when she kills the clicker in the basement. She's clearly getting more comfortable with it. And then when confronted with it like this, it was definitely like, oh, this is a very different sort of reaction than we have seen through 8 episodes.
Right, just her like moping in this episode, for lack of a better word. Like she's clearly coping with some traumatic events. But yeah, I mean, just her prior fascination is sort of contextualized in other episodes by her sort of lack of agency and her seeking power over others to sort of be able to have control over her own like destiny and like just being in control of scenarios.
I was just going to say the same thing, that episode 8 is the first time that it is the control is taken away from her. And that the others are exercises in control. And I think that I think one of us said something similar in that episode with the clicker and seeing her sort of like play with like the slice down the head and then killing it, that it seemed like a control thing more than anything else. And I thought that bore out well in terms of the reaction to someone when that control is taken and they're put through a similar situation.
This is stirring up a strange memory of mine, actually. I don't think that she's weird. I actually think that's a very natural and childlike curiosity before you know as an adolescent and an adult that curiosity often leads to danger. I'm thinking of a time when I was a little kid, my brother and I would walk to school together. And one time we came upon a burned down house and we wanted to go downstairs into the basement to like find out what was down there. And we went down the stairs a little bit, but then we got spooked. But I think like me as an adult would not walk even close to that house because I know that
Sure.
it's dangerous. And I think Ellie hasn't experienced a lot of danger. I think she may have a lot of this childlike innocence still until this happens to her. And then that sort of throws her straight into a knowing that is associated with not being a child anymore.
I do like that sort of reading on it. I know that obviously she went through the events of the mall with Riley, but overall, up until she met Joel, she'd had a pretty cushy life. I mean, she lived as a refugee in one of the Fedra camps. Obviously, we come to understand that like Marlene, as Anna's best friend, just dumps her at Fedra's doorstep to be taken care of. So she'd been through some things, but that control was taken away and she was put in this horrible situation and she lost control, and she's seeing really for the first time the consequences of her own violence. Pandora only comes out of the box, you know?
I almost feel like her reaction that she has to the zombie that she finds and the just like buried under the rubble, in a way, like there is definitely that curiosity there, but that's also something that can be helpful in a way to know in those types of situation exactly how a creature like that can be killed. It's only to your benefit and safety to understand that. And in a way, maybe like an odd fascination, but also bravery to be willing to step up and do that. And again, you brought up the mall situation, and just thinking back to that, and like, there's definitely some types of anger that would have been built up from having that occur to somebody that you cared about so closely, and feeling like that any type of future that you might have had with that person was ripped away. And so in a way, it could have also been her taking out her anger on the like zombies just for having like stolen that friend from her and that future. And just her reaction to that, especially after seeing that flashback scene, makes me think that there might be, definitely some strong emotions tied.
And it's something that we will touch on when we get to sort of the end of the episode, but like, I think there's a lot of good things happening in the script, and you guys are making great points about like what was probably meant to be inferred. And I guess it just comes down to performance things, where like a lot of the things that I read in Bella Ramsey's performance is like, man, why is she such a sicko about some of this stuff? And conversely, some of the stuff with Joel, like at the end, they turn him into John Wick, and it's like cold-hearted evil in a way that was not present in the game. And again, I don't want to get too deep into those comparisons yet, but is that strictly a performance thing, or is that a director thing? Was that a choice on their end, or I mean, we will never know, I guess. So we're just reading between the lines here.
Something about Joel's snap. Okay, so not a snap, but like what happens in the first part of the episode that Chris just talked about, where he's trying to cheer her up or something, like he's trying to like bring up things that make her turn into old Ellie, which is not going to be possible anymore. I was talking to Chris about this last night, kind of chewing on it. Like, I think that this is like a reaction that Joel is having to, like, a sort of self-blaming, because he kind of gives up when he gets stabbed and he's almost dead. Like, he kind of gives up and he's like, Ellie, go do the thing. And she saves him, but he makes her have to do that, because like we see this fierce, crazy Joel later. We're like, he probably could have fought through this stab. Instead, I think he gave up and she saved him. And because she had to save him, she almost got sexually assaulted. she had to fend for herself. And I bet you that part of it is that Joel blames himself. And so he's trying really hard to fix it. Like, I will never, ever hesitate again to let you take care of yourself, because obviously you can't yet. And I needed to be there for you. And I failed. So now I think at this point, like, there's no question. Joel doesn't have any hesitations because he sees what happened when he hesitated.
Also, just thinking about Joel, the way he's treating Ellie in this moment, it's sort of like he's reverted to pre-apocalypse. Like, this is him trying to connect with a daughter figure in a way that he had a connection with Sarah. And he never got to fulfill the end of that relationship where its daughter is actually grown up. So he's now he's like sort of substituting Ellie in for that relationship that he had then. And yeah, totally. Like, he's trying to cheer her up. He's trying to do the dad thing of like let's play Boggle. Let's, eat some Chef Boyardee because this made you laugh before. And it is like corny and hokey, but that's like a total dad move. And I thought that Pedro Pascal really sold it well. And that any faults with like the way we perceive Bella Ramsey's performance, I think is almost us reading into her as being an older character than she actually is. And I think that's a really hard line to sort of walk, is playing a young character when we don't necessarily like, we're looking for reasons not to at every given moment. And writing, I mean, the script has had ups and downs, so it's really easy to like lose that kind of thread. Throughout this episode, I think Ellie as a character and Bella Ramsey's performance as her was strong.
I'm with you, man. I mean, I was on the train from episode 1. I was like, I see it. There was some little bit of pushing in some of those first F-bombs in the first episode, but yeah, I was a believer. We proceed into Salt Lake City. We get a classic little Last of Us game mechanic tossed in breadcrumb of like, let me boost you up and push the ladder down. I was like,
we got the ladder.
I did that. And Ellie gets very excited and Ellie runs away, and fans of the game, aka me, were like, oh my God, they didn't cut it. I was so worried they were going to cut it. And there was a little bit of scuttlebutt of, well, how could she see it? And I'm like, there's fucking windows everywhere. She saw a neck. She's like, I got to get a better view, whatever, logic. I don't give a shit. But she goes running out. Fans of the game know exactly what's going to happen. They come out and there's the fucking giraffe, a real giraffe.
Hold on. We know from behind the scenes photos that a giraffe was there.
Yes.
But this giraffe they were interacting with was largely CGI.
No, it was not.
Yes, it was. I have watched this over and over.
The giraffe wasn't CGI, the background was, so it made it look CGI.
Exactly. The giraffe was a real fucking giraffe.
Next week, we're going to get our Corridor Crew breakdown, and we're going to have this discourse again, because I promise you there were moments where that giraffe was fake as hell. At first, I was like, wait, they couldn't just import a giraffe? And I was like, wait, they did import a giraffe! Why does it look like this?
Because that's what a fucking giraffe looks like. It's that thing where you're expecting CGI, but it's not. And a giraffe is just the most like batshit insane animal on earth, as far as I'm concerned. So like, it's gonna look like, that's not how it looks like. That's not what it looks like. That's no way.
What kind of dog is this?
Because you're uncultured swine.
I'm convinced that they're like, this giraffe isn't doing exactly what we want it to do. And there's some fuckery going on there.
Time for you to go to the zoo.
All right.
Concert Crusade podcast goes to the zoo. Zoocast.
That's treading some dubious water there, my friend. Anyway.
It has since been revealed in a Reddit AMA with a VFX artist who worked on the show that the giraffe, excluding the moments where it eats from Ellie's hands, is largely CGI. Not that it wasn't blatantly obvious, you meanies.
Center us, Chris.
So I'll do my best. So we get the scene, which is like not the scene from the game, but like a top 3 easily scene from the game, where there's this giraffe and Ellie gets to feed this giraffe, and this great like father-daughter moment of like, yeah, take the branch and feed, and just seeing like Ellie come alive again in that moment, and seeing Joel like clock Ellie coming alive again and taking such like great satisfaction of, God, maybe she's going to be okay. Maybe it's going to be okay. And then the shot, we pan out further and we see like the whole herd of giraffes that they've like clearly got out of the zoo in Salt Lake City or whatever, and have like bred a whole little group of giraffes. And
Sarah was like, why are there giraffes here? And I was like, well, all the animals had to go somewhere and they've had 20 years to breed. And she was like, well, how come like the lions haven't killed them? And I was like, well, they're, the food source in an overgrown wasteland for an herbivore like a giraffe, you know, it's a lot more plentiful. I mean, the lions probably were living large for a little while, but you know, it's 20 years later. You know, their food sources. It's quite scarce.
Where are the monkeys?
We saw the monkeys in the last episode, or 3 episodes ago.
They all moved to that city.
Anyway, we have a little moment between Joel and Ellie where Joel offers to her, he gives her the choice basically. He's like, you don't have to go through with this. And we can leave, we can go back to Jackson. And Ellie's like, no, we came here, we need to see this through. And then there's a moment between, I think this is the moment between the two where Ellie is like, once we're done with this, I will go wherever you go. That sort of solidifies this bond that's been formed between them. And we see Joel, Pedro, give him the Emmy, folks. I mean, maybe, I don't know, but like he was fucking great in this episode. Just seeing all the different things like wash over his face in that mode of like, oh my God, maybe I could really get back a piece of what's lost. Maybe it was worth it to keep going.
I don't know if it was this moment or a little bit later, but Joel sharing how he got his scar and having that sort of correlation to not having something to live for and communicating that to Ellie. And then obviously the choice later of him making the choice for her, just Joel sharing that moment with her of him, like he had given up, sharing that, you know, you will find something to live for. And Ellie maybe not exactly relating to him exactly, but not sure if she believes him in that moment, but it is a thought shared and she hears it. But also, I think the thesis of this episode is Ellie saying it can't all be for nothing. And that's like the line that I take away from this entire episode is when she says that to him.
The sort of dichotomy in their experience and their worldviews after the end of this episode become so much clearer. Like, you know, Joel has spent 20 years trying to find meaning in these little moments, knowing that like things are so fucked. Ellie has such a bigger purpose in her own mind. Like, we can fix this. Whether I like it or not, have something to do with that. And Joel is like, I don't give a shit. Like, I finally found my meaning. And
I don't think there's any awareness on her part of why they're going there. I don't think there's any information on the table where other than like, I know I need to be there. And that's sort of,
well, she knows that she's the key to a cure. They talk about it. They're talking about it around the campfire in episode, is that 4?
Marlene impresses upon her that she can't share like her condition and
Right.
that like that's why she's being transported.
Right. Obviously, nobody knows that the procedure involves her literally dying.
I don't think that there's a sense of the scope. I think that, as Tiffany was saying earlier, like the youthful enthusiasm of I can make a difference, I could do something, like that moment when she gives Sam like some of her blood to try to cure him on the bed, that like she has an inkling, but it's like she thinks it's like a comic book. You know what I mean? Like she thinks like, oh, I can be the superhero in this comic book and they'll draw my blood and they'll maybe fix people, but it's not an actualized thought of what you actually have to give up.
I just want to say I really like the dialogue in this scene. I think it's well written because a lot is unsaid. And again, this is making us a detective and solving what are they not saying. I think the problem with a lot of TV that made me never think TV could be as good as it is. Like, this is a great show. Andor is a great show. And Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad. And a lot of what these great shows do is they show, don't tell, you know, and the shows that are bad tell us things that we already figured out. They just say it after we figured it out, and it's really stupid. And so in this scene between him and Ellie, they just say very, very simple things that have so much subtext in them. And that's on the writing. Like, that's not on the actors, it's the writing. Like, the actors are doing a great job doing it simply, but I think the writers are fucking amazing in this script. So I guess that's a big tribute to the game because a lot of the text is taken straight from the game. I know that. But I really, really like this scene.
This is an addition. And the scene that Nick's referring to is the very next scene that happens. A perfect segue, Mr. Durheim. Thank you. When we get to the army hospital and Ellie's asking about the scar, and Joel's like, I was in one of these places, and you know, I shot and missed. And Ellie makes a joke, and Joel turns back and says, I was the one who shot and missed, which is a great Holy cow, is that a great addition to this show? I felt like
The gravity of that moment, dude, it was like the air being sucked out of the living room, and we're like, I don't even know if we had theorized about this. Like, we thought maybe it was, did he receive this when Sarah died? Like, and then we just sort of ran off from it. And so, like, when he reveals that, it's so heavy. And then, yeah, they have their little sit down, and they have their conversation together. And, dude, Bella Ramsey, her reaction through this entire thing when Pedro Pascal is talking, and there's these little moments on her face, dude, when he says, it wasn't time that healed my wounds, or however he phrased it, and she recognizes what he's saying, dude, that got me good.
give him the Emmy. Give it to him.
We've given Bella Ramsey her flowers. She's had her moments, and she does what Pedro Pascal has done so well in this entire series. And we saw it especially when the script was really poor in the Left Behind episode, that Bella Ramsey still was able to do so much when she wasn't having to say these awful lines. And that when she's opposite someone who is actually working with a competent script, those moments are like even more powerful. Got me all misty, you know? Don't tell Sarah.
This was the point where I just realized there was a lot of onion powder in the popcorn seasoning we had. It was real strange.
Over-seasoned it. Yeah, no, that happens
Yeah.
from time to time. Totally.
Nick, what the fuck were you doing, man? Come on. Too much onion powder in the popcorn.
I was crying into the popcorn.
Why is it so wet?
No, not wet.
Really salty.
Oh. All right. So we get this scene, which, holy shit, as we've all said, I'm not going to add more words to the discourse here. It's been said. They start moving forward. We see fire. We see some paramilitary folks creeping up from behind. Who, I mean, like, I'm like, okay, they're Fireflies because I know the game, but perhaps not all of us did. They get flashbanged. Joel gets knocked out. Tiffany's indicating, I don't have a fucking clue. So, okay, great, good to know. But we wake up. The first thing Joel sees is the Firefly insignia, and now we're in the lab. We're in the hospital. Ellie was knocked out from that flashbang grenade. I just want that on record as we proceed forward into discourse about this section. And we get the scene that kicks us off into the end of the finale. It's basically an exposition dump that sort of calls back to the cold open and is like, our doctors are pretty sure Ellie's been living with this infection her whole life, that it's producing a signal basically to cordyceps that tells any infection that she's already a cordyceps, which functionally makes her immune. And they think if we can replicate that signal, we can create a vaccine. Now, I know we have two here who did not play the games, but I want to say now that we're at this moment, just to lay this on record, in the games, I can't remember if it's a file you pick up, if it's an audio recording. My collectibles from Prestige games are all running together, but there is information that you get in a collectible in The Last of Us that says that they have had other folks like Ellie in the lab. They have done the procedure and they could not replicate what was going on in their brains.
I did some research on this last night, actually, or 2 nights ago, because I was really confused about my own memory of the game, where exactly I was under the impression that there was something that you do not discover unless you really go out of your way for it. It's a log from the doctor who's doing the procedure, and it turns out they had done procedures on other individuals, whether they were infected or recently infected, we don't know, but there's nothing explicitly that actually tells us that there was anybody like Ellie, and the doctor's actually surprised that they'd never seen someone like Ellie before, and so that's why they're so excited to have her in the lab to experiment with. So I spent 10 years thinking like, oh, okay, like to me, whether Joel knows that or not, it justifies it to me. So like the discourse about his decision like doesn't matter to me as much, but I've been mistaken all this time, and I've even said it on this podcast, like, oh no, there were other immune people. There are not explicitly anyway, not that we know of. However, this doctor had been working for a very long time trying to decipher the cordyceps infection. Anyway, obviously we don't touch on that in the show at all, and thankfully we don't. I'm glad we don't.
That being in the game at all would have been like, if it was as you guys remembered it, I think that would have been a cop out, and it would have really ruined the ending. It would make, like you said, it would make Joel's choice meaningless. It would be Joel is the paragon, never made a bad choice ever. And instead we have to ask questions, which is much more interesting as a viewer and as a participant in the case of the game.
I want that choice to be the trolley fucking question. Like, yeah, dude, save the world or save this daughter figure. That's way more compelling because it makes Joel the bad guy.
Save the world or save your world.
So Tiffany is screaming from the other room that,
I was gonna say that.
well, you were getting fucking white cheddar Cheez-Its, so you snooze, you lose, babe.
Fuck off.
So I will say that thank you for setting the record straight on that first, EJ, and that definitely that makes me feel better for a lot of reasons as a player of the games. The explanation of the specificity of this is exactly why we think this is going to work, I still think is a really fucking good change, because as outlined by Marlene, that seems pretty fucking plausible that it's going to work. My recollection from the game is, well, we think it'll work, but it's not as explicitly laid out that they have a really solid theory on why it's going to work. And we see Joel discovering in the moment, another great moment for Pedro Pascal, the infection is in the brain. And another great like show don't tell and Marlene's not going to say it, but Marlene is hardened, and we saw in the beginning Marlene's going to make the fucking hard choices. She's going to stalk into the room and she's going to take that person out if it means honoring a commitment that she has made, which in this case is we're going to cut this girl's brain out of her head and make a vaccine out of it.
Can we just for a moment linger on the fact that Marlene is an awful friend? And I know that she's got these like morally sound reasons, like we're going to save the world and shit. But like, she promises her best friend that she's going to look after her daughter. Instead, she dumps her on Fedra's doorstep. Then she shows back up when this girl is reintroduced into her life and is like, all right, we're going to send you across the country to get your fucking head cut open. Fuck you. It's kind of fuck Marlene, but also it's like to save the world. So it's just, this is what the show wants you to feel, though, is like, I'm on these characters' sides, you know? Like, I rooted for Heisenberg until the end. Fuck that guy, you know? So it's like, this is what the show's trying to do. And it's supposed to feel bad.
It is supposed to feel bad. It's definitely supposed to feel bad. And I think also in her mind, I feel like she is honoring her friend's memory because her friend died from an infection, and to put her with Fedra is to guarantee her safety in the only way that you possibly could in a quarantine zone. That if she's like, okay, you're just going to run with the Fireflies, like she could have been dead at age like 3. Also like a screaming baby in a paramilitary base. It's like literally an alarm system that's like, come blow this fucking building up.
What about all the pipe bombs she gives Riley? Don't you think that might have hurt Ellie?
Yeah, Marlene's not the good guy here.
I don't think Marlene ever wants to protect Ellie. I think she only does it because her friend who dies says you have to. Because she says the phrase like, you know, I can't do that. I think that's exactly what she says. And then she puts her with a, you know, I guess whatever with the childhood, but like when she puts her with Joel, I don't think she thinks that he's going to make it. I think that because when he finds her, she goes, how did you do it? Like, we lost a shit ton of people on the way here. How did you keep her alive? I don't think she thought she was going to keep her alive. I also think, though, Marlene doesn't want to be the one that kills her. Of course. So Marlene's trying to make it so somebody else is the reason that this kid dies. So she's honoring kind of Anna's wishes.
Yeah, why didn't you take her ass across the country? What the fuck, Marlene? You ended up
because Joel shot her, dude, in the fucking, or whoever shot her. I don't know how it plays out in the show. In the game, it was Joel, right, who shoots her, but she got shot in that first episode. So she's like, this is your fault, motherfucker. So now she's your problem because she wasn't well enough to travel. Isn't that what it was?
We just see Marlene be a coward throughout this entire episode.
Right.
It takes her a moment to like steel herself enough to do the thing her friend asked her to do. And then instead of making the choice to kill Joel, which she should have done if she was so convicted in her belief that Ellie was the cure, but instead she's like, I don't want to, I can't do that. So I'll just let him walk away, like with this either cowardice or a misplaced sense of like honor. But you got to pick a lane, Marlene. That's why you got.
Regardless of what we think of Marlene personally in that character, her use to the plot and like thematically is like obviously the choice being taken from Ellie and Marlene and Joel representing two different choices. Without spoiling anything, that lack of choice becomes an integral part of the ongoing story. I think they did that really well.
And it's totally fine. Also, I'm not. This isn't like a criticism of the character as written. It's just like it's you shouting at the TV, why are you making such a bad decision?
Yes.
That's like good. That's a good interaction that I'm having. It's me being upset with a character for a reasonable like thing. Like it's written that way.
Yes, it's a credit to the writing, and I think you're spot fucking on that. Like, and even like you're a resistance group, but you're kind of this like underground guerrilla group, and you're hitting a lot of like you're using a lot of really shady tactics, and like you're affecting people other than Fedra while you're warring with Fedra. Great fucking point. Great fucking point. So, as you said, Nick, another perfect segue. Thank you very much. Marlene is like declines to kill Joel on the spot, which oopsie, and says drop him at the gates. And they escort Joel out of the room, goes down a couple flights of stairs. He pauses a few times and like, hey buddy, keep going. It seems like Joel's like really intentionally like testing the waters and seeing what are these guys going to do? When are they going to make a mistake? And then finally one of them gets close enough that he can manipulate his body. He gets them out of the way. He takes his gun, kills one of them, asks the other one, where is she? You know, et cetera, et cetera. He doesn't have anything to offer, so he kills him. And then we get a montage. And I thought that after episode 8, they showed us what Joel was capable of doing in really gristly detail when he is torturing those two members of David's group for information about Ellie. And I thought, thank fucking God, what a great addition to the show to build us into episode 9. And then we kind of got the fucking in the arms of an angel equivalent of this final sequence in The Last of Us, where we have this like really schmaltzy music and really like obscuring camera angles where we don't really see him kill anybody after those first two people. We see him pull the knife out, and even that is like out of frame when he stabs the guy. It's like shaky cam. We see like one shot that I'm sure Craig Mason thought was very artistic of a guy on the ground with a bullet in his head, which affected me a little bit. I'll be totally honest with you. But I thought they pulled their punches here.
Everything about this whole scene was very weird to me. Like they turned him into John Wick. They didn't really show us the emotion of the moment. He was very cold and calculated. And then, yeah, setting it to like, you said in the arms of an angel. That's perfect. I mean, it was a very weird decision. But I want to get your thoughts on the violence in this show. We have talked about it at length, and sort of the way Chris put it was, you know, they were sort of saving their pennies to hopefully make this finale extremely dramatic. But Lindsay, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts on the violence in this show overall, and how that sort of crescendoed or did not in this final episode?
But it was interesting to see some of the progression with it, especially as Joel is confronting people and, you know, like threatening to pop off a guy's kneecap, things like that. Overall, to be honest, I had expected more coming from a show that's in a horror genre for a post-apocalyptic zombie show. I think for the most part, it was done well because it seemed like what they were interested in focusing on most is the character development and the story itself. And sometimes when things are so hyper violent, it can take away from that to a sense. So yeah, and then I think one thing that really stood out to me is that a lot of times when you saw some of the more violent moments, especially with like Joel's character or even with Ellie and maybe a few other key characters, was that a lot of times they were building up the emotions with it, and the times that it felt most important to show it was when it had those emotions tied to it, when someone was looking to protect somebody that they cared about or try to save them. And so I think in that aspect, they approached it well. Again, I feel like they could have played it up a little more if they had wanted to, but I wouldn't say that there wasn't necessarily enough by any means.
I don't know. Everything else in the show felt really slow and concentrated and thoughtful, and this just felt urgent. And I get it a little bit from Joel's perspective, but it was a little unfair to us who are not as fast decisioned as Joel. Like to give us like a moment at the beginning where she shoots the woman to not think about it. That was enough. And I feel like I agree with your sentiments on it a little bit or a lot, EJ, because like I do feel like it was, I don't know, like we were just going through it really fast. I was like, I feel like everything in this show has taken time. And this moment feels like it could have taken more time. And they robbed us a little bit of chewing with the fact that Joel was turning into a villain. that was something that stuck with me too. And I do think actually that's kind of an outcome of it being so fast, was like I was suddenly like, oh shit, is he a bad guy? He's not a good guy, is he? I do understand why Joel did it so quickly. Like, I actually think it's a good choice for the character because he hesitated when his actual daughter died. And so I think at this point he realizes, like, if I hesitate, then Ellie's going to die. So he's making that decision. But I mean, add in like a whole nother minute of shooting people for us, I guess.
It would have been nice to see, well, like emotionally, and this is something that the game does very well, you see the struggling father doing something that he knows is horrible, that feels explicitly communicated. That's why you feel so ambivalent about the ending in the game. And the show, they very much made him this stone cold killer after spending episodes and months in this world, sort of building a much more thoughtful Joel. And he says, like, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be, him and Tommy have that moment. And in this moment, he makes a decision and he goes full John Wick. Like, not even the fight scene, there wasn't even a struggle. Like, it was just Terminator mode.
I get that. And I think that I would disagree with you in that they were showing us a Joel that is generally more thoughtful, and that they were showing us a Joel who is struggling to know what to do with what he is capable of because he doesn't have a reason to do it. And I think that got hammered home in that scene we've all talked about, with I shot and missed, and it wasn't the time that healed it, is that he makes no bones about doing it if it'll benefit him, if it'll benefit Tess. But to do it, well, Tess to a certain extent, he'd been looking for a reason. He needs a reason to do it, and he had a reason to do it. And I love that we saw him struggling with it. And that's where I'm like, give me 5 more minutes in this episode. Give me 5 minutes and spend 3 of them with Joel wrestling with this so that we see a decision that doesn't just come so immediately. Because that's juicy stuff, right? Like, that's the good shit, is to see people like in the muck and indecision and trying to sort that out. But instead it was just like, take him away. And we're like, I already know what's happening. Like, immediately already know what his choice is.
We had speculated about what we would get in this final episode as far as setup for the next season, and we didn't get any of the things that we had discussed.
I'm glad, in hindsight.
Yes, given the way that the show bore out, I agree. But they did make 2 decisions that, again, this is not a spoiler. Obviously, the second game will heavily wrestle with the decisions that were made in this game, and they made 2 minor changes to this final encounter that I think were great changes as far as how that will set up, our future conflict, which is all I'll say. Okay. But
what were the changes?
Him being a stone cold killer and him leaving those 2 nurses alive.
Okay. I was like, if you were going to put that on the record, I want to put that on the record that in the game, you kill the nurses. Everyone in that room dies. Like, it's not, he doesn't just kill the doctor and leave the nurses. Everyone dies. I completely fucking agree, because it showed that he is willing to deploy that violence very specifically, and he has removed the threat from the room and no longer needs to continue to deploy this violence. He has won. It is over. Though they cannot conduct the surgery, the threat is gone.
We've had this conversation about the show's pacing, and Tiffany, you touched on this about how you kind of wish you had gotten a little more time to breathe in these moments leading up to Joel's decision. And we have debated at length about, even going back to episode 3, which I've said 1,000 times, in a vacuum was a great piece of television. That's an hour of television that really had no bearing on our story, our characters. Like, thematically, it's relevant. It was good television. But now that, we're kind of feeling like the last 3 episodes are a little cramped. And, in the middle with Tommy, Nick, you'd say maybe we had a little bit more. That would have been nice. I want a little bit more in winter before all the David stuff. And now seeing how this finale just went from like, here's the fallout of the trauma of the last episode into like our moment with the giraffes. And then boom, suddenly Joel is going Keanu Reeves in here. And it just felt like a fucking roller coaster ride, and not in a good way. So looking back, we can kind of dissect the moments where they kind of stumbled. I just want to point out that I feel a little bit justified in my concerns, since Episode 2, Chris. Okay.
I mean, fine, like, sure, I guess. I don't know what. I think the fact that we needed 5 more minutes in this episode doesn't affect the way that they paced anything else, even though now that we've seen how well, and I said this last week, how well they executed every other side story except for Kathleen. Yes, I agree. That sequence needed some work. And I think that casting Melanie Liskey didn't fucking work. It did not pan out on some. She did not turn in the kind of really convincing performance that we got from literally every other person who spoke English or not, or sign language. I shall include our non-speaking community, our hard of hearing community, except for her. Everybody but her turned in a fantastic performance.
I just wanted to give my 2 cents on the action part of this episode. I found it to be effective. I thought that a montage with a de-emphasis on the sound of the action, like you are a viewer in this scenario. You're not inhabiting Joel. You're seeing Joel and how he is reacting to what he's doing. And you do not see him reveling in this. This is a thing that he's doing to protect the one that he's chosen to protect. And it is calculated. It is cold. We've seen him be cold and calculated. And it's not like a turn for the character. I don't agree that you see him, pull John Wick. It's just, he is doing what he does well, and he is doing it well. And when, like Chris said, like once the threat is neutralized, he has Ellie in his arms, he leaves. And that is the end of the scene. And the brevity of it gives it impact. And if anything, we don't need more time in the action. We need more time before the action. We need more time him walking with Ellie, having conversations, talking with her. Like the moments that we do have, that's the strength of this episode, is him talking about his failed suicide and Ellie talking about it can't all be for nothing. Like that's what gives everything else impact. And then immediately after, we get more impact of Joel choosing to tell the lie and to continue to lie. And that is the ramifications. The ramifications obviously are the choices that he makes, killing all these people. Like that is a clear and obvious ramification, but the interpersonal ramification is him betraying that trust, him choosing not to trust himself to tell Ellie the truth, and having that fear of losing someone overtake him, and him choosing the coward's way out of not, telling Ellie what he did.
100%. And another flawless segue. Tiffany was like, muted the mic, was like, I'm going to hold my thought. That's too good a segue to pass up, moving us through the conversation. So Joel gets Ellie to the parking garage. We see an interaction with Marlene, who trains a gun on Joel and is like, we can still make this work, which the doctor's dead. I don't see how that works, but she's still trying to hold on to this thought of what could be, right? There could be another doctor. I don't know, whatever. And we get a really great cut between, Joel sitting with that decision and Marlene like lowering her gun and saying like, it's okay, we can talk about this. And then we see Joel in a truck, Ellie waking up in the back seat. We cut back and forth between what happened in the parking garage and Ellie waking up and Joel saying they ran some tests and it wasn't going to work. And Ellie's like, where are my clothes? And then we see the first muzzle flash of Joel shooting Marlene. And then later we see Joel approaching Marlene's prone and wounded body and firing a second time to ensure that the kill was made.
You'll just come after her. And I like the elements of this exchange and this follow-up to what has been happening. I'm going to pull an EJ and say that I didn't like the back and forth non-linear editing. I thought that was a bad choice and was probably excising scenes that they had filmed and then cut, and then they ended up with this. They could have just kept it linear and it would have been more impactful, in my opinion.
Oh, I liked it though, because it leaves us with a question when we're in the car of, did he kill Marlene or not?
It's a question they answer 30 seconds later, and it's not impactful because of that.
If we had gotten a little more separation, like if we had maybe, I don't know if you flash back to that, like once they're hiking to Jackson and somewhere in their conversation there, but I agree with you, Nick, that it was too quick, but I really did like going back to that as we're trained on Pedro Pascal's performance and we're just cutting between him and that moment. It could have been done more cleanly.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I'll agree with you for a change, just for the sake of variety.
Okay.
I thought it was a good choice, and I will agree that it could have been executed a little bit more cleanly, and maybe it was like a little bit of distance to let that question settle. before we come back to it, sure. But I also kind of, there's something about it and why I liked the choice of hearing him tell the lie and seeing the last action that solidified the lie that worked really well. So in any case, he lies to Ellie and he tells her that they're a lot like you. They ran some tests. It wasn't going to work. They've been trying for a long time. And then they're out, and then we get them hiking to Jackson. And there's this goddamn, like, just the difference between beginning of episode Joel dad energy and end of episode Joel dad energy. It's a very fucking different energy. So that is the energy of a man at the end of that episode who knows he fucked up and is desperately trying to make connection to start to atone for it. And oh my God, did he sell it well. And you can see Ellie just wrestling and not knowing what to do. And then finally like broaching the subject of, you asked about like, this isn't the first person that I've killed, that I've seen dead. It says it was Riley. It was my friend. And then it was Tess. And then just posing the question to him of, are you telling me the truth about this? And pretty much was shot for shot from the end of the game. Although they did cut one of my favorite fucking lines from this video game, which I will add as an aside, that I was waiting for 9 episodes, which is my own fault. But still waiting for 9 episodes for Joel to say in that scene, I struggled for a long time with surviving, which is like the line of the game to me in many ways. They cut it, whatever. But Ellie's like, tell me this is the truth. Tell me what you told me about the Fireflies is the truth. Joel commits to the lie, and we get that long shot, same as in the end of the game, of Ellie deciding what she's going to make of that, and then looking up and just simply saying, okay, and choosing to accept it. Bam, cut to black, end of series. I love that they hewed so close to the game. I don't think you need to mess with something that's basically a cutscene anyway, like the Jackson epilogue, which is just like a walk cycle. I am so interested. Like the number one thing I want to hear from y'all, Tiffany and Lindsay, folks who did not play the game, is how did this sit with you?
Once the episode had ended, first thing I did was turn to Nick and I said, that was it? Just the pacing of this episode. Yeah. I think it was a good note to end on, but overall, just to touch back on like what Nick was talking about, just as far as the pacing of the episode, it felt like it was a little bit robbed in a way, building up so much story throughout the show to have felt the last episode to be so rushed. And, maybe I had just put expectations into it, but I feel like there could have been more there. And then just as far, I obviously had some questions, like as if Nick knew if the game, I was curious if you did choose to not save Ellie, like what would happen. And he explained that that was just a game over. So I just made the point that they didn't really give Joel a choice. Yeah, that was interesting. And then just like looking back through everything that happened, honestly, I think that the worst choice that he made was lying to her. And I know that this is something I've spoken a bit with, just with all of my coworkers who are also mushroom fans, of course, have been watching the show and just discussing that, would it have made more sense for him to have lied to her? Like, she's still a child. But then for me, how I see it, she's old enough, and the things that they've been through together just feels like a betrayal to what they've gone through. And also, in a way, just him maybe having some doubts as to her being able to handle the truth. I think there's some protection in there for him as well, and just like trying to look better for his own sake so that she doesn't just take off. I'm sure that's a fear of his. And I'm sure there's some motivation in there as well, that he's trying to make it so that she actually feels like she can continue living on her life without having these deep regrets that knowing information like that might cause. But when it comes down to it, it would have been more fair to her to have been honest.
First of all, your reaction to the end of this is exactly the way I felt the first time I played this game. That was it. I felt so hollow. Because I didn't necessarily agree with Joel in the moment, but it felt so anticlimactic in that final 20 minutes or whatever. And so it's interesting to hear that you kind of share that sentiment. The game didn't have these pacing issues that the show had, so that maybe compounds it a little bit. But obviously, Joel's motivation here is probably less about himself and more about protecting Ellie. And that's just him maybe being ignorant of like you said, what Ellie can and can't handle. For me, the hard decision was, murdering everybody. Lying to Ellie seems like a logical byproduct of that. And while maybe I disagree from a pedestal looking down on them, like, oh, you should have been honest with her. But like, I completely understand why he started making those choices and how that carries over into the next part of the story. But
before I get to the end, I'm sorry, I do need to back up a little bit because I did want to say, I actually do think this is the biggest problem with this episode is that last montage. Why didn't they put us in the experience of the game? Like, how cool that would have been. It's a show. Sure, that might be a reason, but like, why not break that expectation? How exciting that would have been if they had. And also, like when they're fighting the first clicker, it's slow. You see him creeping around the corner. Like, they didn't put any of that in this scene. It was so odd. It was dissonant is what it was. Montage with music. I think the music, even if you just take that out, that would have made a big difference. Like, if we could hear the steps, if we could hear the bodies falling to the floor, like all of those little sounds, those actually are a big reason what make horror interesting and scary is hearing small, subtle sounds. And so they robbed us a little bit of that. Like, that was a poor choice. Whoever made that choice, I have to say, I don't like that choice. I don't mind the pacing if you at least remove that music. I guess that's just weird. It softened it. It made it easier for us to digest, I guess. And I don't want that. I don't want it to be easier.
Bouncing off of that, I think that it reflects the intention of that scene not to be a thrilling or exciting moment like we have with the clicker. Like, you want to be afraid for the characters in that moment, but you're not afraid for Joel in this moment. You are not excited for Joel to be killing these bad guys because the bad guys aren't like, they're not bad guys really. Marlene's kind of shitty. They're trying to create a cure. They didn't ask Ellie for her permission to do this thing. That's not explicitly told to us. That's like inferred, but it is a moment of sadness, and the music is corny, and it could have been just as sad without music, but I think the music was there to soften the sound design of, like you said, if we hear bodies hitting the floor, then that's like a different vibe.
I wanted that vibe.
yeah.
Well, yeah, that's just it. Is like, yes, it was a choice, and yes, I see that it was done for a specific reason. Like, obviously, it was done for a specific reason, but if you want to put us into this situation and to make us, because film is about manipulation, film and television ultimately is about manipulation, which is not to say like the negative connotation of manipulation, just to manipulate. They want us to feel a certain way, ideally to have a certain kind of emotional response. If you want us to be in the sense of, oh God, this is horrible, but it has to be done, a schmaltzy montage is just not an effective way to do it. Like, I haven't seen anybody on any of my socials go like, yeah, that really made that moment come home for me.
That's fair. I wasn't as negatively affected by it as you guys were. So it didn't take me out of it. It was just like, I saw what they were doing and it was like, okay, yeah, this is that moment. And I think it's also it's a very difficult thing to adapt as well, because it is a moment that can only really be effectively portrayed to you in the medium of a game where you are controlling this character, and it puts you in that moment of like, you are doing the bad thing. This is you doing that thing. And we can talk about whether or not that's effective or it's like feeling emotionally manipulative, but that's also a fine line to cross of like, oh, they're making me cry because they know they can make me cry, like the beginning of Up, so it's like, it's obviously a fine line, and it clearly didn't work for you guys, but for me, it was like, this works. Okay. Like, it wasn't like bad. It is what it is. And as a viewer, I'm not as deeply invested as I think maybe the three of you are.
That's true. They got me hooked.
I will say the music did feel cheesy to me.
In the arms.
Yeah, for real.
I like Tiffany's point about maybe it could have having been done from the perspective of how you would have been playing the game. Because as someone who didn't play, I'm often thinking about what these scenes may have looked like to someone as they were playing. And it's always interesting to see how they have adapted that to a television show where you're watching these characters versus playing as one of them. So that could have definitely made it a little bit more interesting.
Yeah, and to finish off what I was saying about like the ending, I think it bookends. That's why I pointed out the lie at the beginning. Ha! Because it bookends it. You know, her mother lied to Marlene and Joel lies to her. And that's sort of it's a little too pretty in some ways. As a director, I'm sure they were like, or writer, I guess that would be more on the writer's fault. You know, it's a little pretty, but also kind of cool. But honestly, I think what I shared with Chris was that I think this is going to drive a big wedge between them because I know Ellie knows. Like, I'm a Scorpio. I know when someone's lying to me. I hate it. It's my least favorite thing in life is it. Just be honest with me. I can deal with the truth even if it sucks more than I can deal with a lie finding out later that it was a lie. So I think Ellie, whatever the hell happens when she eventually finds this out is a lie, is, he made the wrong choice here. He's made a couple of wrong choices now. Now that he cares about something, I think he made the right choice with, what was the lady's name that died?
Marlene?
No, sorry.
Tess?
Long time ago. Tess, yeah. I think he made the right choice when Tess died. I think he made the right choice when, he I don't know, all the different things along the way, leaving his brother, like that stuff. And then he finally starts making wrong choices again, probably because he's scared. Maybe because he's scared.
The fact of the matter is, Ellie's 14 years old, that she was denied the ability to make this choice. And as the parental figure in that situation, I don't know that I terribly disagree with the choice. I think lying is bad news bears, can only breed bad things. Maybe, although, as we've talked about, to live with that knowledge that it could have been. And but regardless of anyway, that at least 14 years old, and even if she had been conscious, that is a 14-year-old brain that is 11 years away from being fully developed. My buddy Nate was telling me, I can't remember which response podcast he was listening to. It wasn't the companion podcast, but the hosts who are not gamers were talking about, in the United Kingdom, they tried experimenting with raising the driving age to 23, and they found that teaching people how to drive at 23 was causing more problems than teaching at 16, because a 15 and 16-year-old brain hasn't developed a sense of a sense of danger that a 23-year-old brain has, which meant that the 23-year-olds were racked with anxiety and were prone to more bad decision making. And were inhibiting themselves because they had developed that sense of fear and that sense of danger.
I learned how to drive at 21. I can agree that it was much more anxious for me.
So to bring this back to this specific conversation we're having about Ellie, is that 14-year-old Ellie would go, yeah, take my brain, in a way that a kid that is fully developed is more capable of making a decision based on the scope of the rest of their life and not just in that immediate moment based on what they think is best in their underdeveloped brain. And which is why we have parents, which is why we have guardians, which is why we have people to make those decisions in their stead until they are more fully developed. So I don't hate the choice, and it made me feel icky when I did it in the game, and shooting up that lab is never not going to make me feel horrible. But at the same time, I was like, I don't know that I can say I wouldn't have the same instinct.
We've talked about Joel. His whole life, he has failed. He failed his daughter, and he failed Tess. And, he's so afraid he's going to fail this girl. And right before the lab scene, they get accosted by the Fireflies, and he gets knocked out, and they're getting gassed. You see that panic in that moment. He's failing again. This is happening again. So that, obviously informs that quick decision he does make when he snaps in the lab and does what he does. Yeah, I completely agree that understanding Joel's decision, that's the point of this, is it's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be hard for the viewer. You're supposed to understand Joel, but acknowledge that he's also the fucking bad guy. And then obviously we have quite the range here as far as how we feel about the lie itself. I think as a parental figure and doing your job and protect, if you're going to make that decision and take that, and obviously I agree with you that Ellie doesn't have the perspective to make an informed decision, but it's the principle of the matter. And she's old enough to want that choice. And so if you're going to make that choice, you kind of got to just see the lie all the way through. And obviously that will have ramifications later, but it's supposed to make us uneasy. This is not something we'll agree on, and people are still arguing about it 10 years later. how they felt about the end of this, you know?
Yeah, I think we're obsessed with the hero's journey. This isn't a hero's journey. This is a human story. I think that's what Joel's experience is he's making very human decisions, and we judge them. Yeah, Ellie seems strange to us, but she's human, you know? If you ever got a chance to see White Noise, and I will proudly plug this movie because I think it's odd and I don't think it's great, but I think it's really interesting and I like a movie like that. There's this movie called White Noise, and it's all about this obsession with violence and death that we have. And I think that as humans, we don't think about that very much, but like, what did we all do during the, let's just say, general terrible things that have happened in the last 10 years? We turn on the TV so we can watch and participate, you know, and as a voyeur. And so we are all fascinated with these weird things, death and violence. And I think a lot of these characters are more honest about it in some ways because we get to watch them and they're a TV character. They're not real. But they are also, I think, written to be very human, and they're dealing with human problems, and great questions that we could ask ourselves, like, what would I do in the apocalypse? And would I kill real people? Would I only kill zombies? You know?
It is certainly interesting to think about from behind the screen, behind the mic. And that's what makes a lot of the discourse like so funny. I was on a Twitter thread, Nick. I was reading like some kind of funny threads, and they were talking about, like, I think Greg Miller had always vehemently opposed Joel's decision, and people are asking him, like, well, now that you're a father, like, do you feel any differently? And so this discourse is reopened, right? You'll never have a consensus on how this plays out. Tiffany, you said it's not supposed to be clean. It is supposed to be filthy and uncomfortable, and that's human. And it doesn't feel good. Like, Lindsay, you said, like, wait, that's it? We want a clean, definitive ending. And like, well, you're in the wrong franchise for that.
Wrong franchise. God, I just remember, and like, I'm a sicko, and I get off on this like ambiguity and unresolved things. You know, it's a David Lynch fan in me, but like playing that game 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, God, and getting to the end of that and it's just burned into my brain. Like, I'll never forget the way it made me feel of just going, oh my God, you can do that? Like, this narrative was shocking in the games industry. Like, people had not done this in a AAA game with this widespread reach. And even at that point, 2013, I don't know that there were, Nick, you can check me hard on this if you need to, but I don't even know that there were that many indie games that were leaving us with questions like this.
2013, I think the closest you got in the AAA space was something like BioShock, which was more of like meta narrative about you as a player being told what to do,
right,
and that being successful. And then before that, you had something like Shadow of the Colossus, which was you doing the bad thing and you realizing you're doing the bad thing gradually throughout the story and not being as explicit. Whereas this was a TV show that you played through back then.
Some would say derisively, yes.
Derisively or not, I mean, that's up to the player to decide, but I think they adapted it really well. People will talk about whether it's breaking the video game curse of bad adaptations. Like, no, that's a stupid conversation to have in general. And there are good adaptations and bad adaptations to film and TV all the time. And video games are just newer, so they haven't had a lot of chances to be adapted. But that's what film and TV are, is adaptations of plays and books and, you know, other medium.
Any final thoughts before I want to kick it back to early in this show and I have a couple of questions. Any final thoughts about the finale here before we go broader?
I was just going to ask the same thing. I was gonna be like, let's kick it to the full season. Let's talk about this thing on some. But EJ, you have some framing questions I want to hear.
I have some questions for Lindsay, or a question, I guess, and just want to kind of get your thoughts about, like, going back to the very beginning. And we see this cold open with, again, I forget who we have. We have an infectious disease expert and a
mycologist.
It is a mycologist. Okay. They start talking about the idea of fungi becoming, say, the average temperature increases ever so slightly. And so obviously, the whole conceit of this universe being that this is plausible, this is a thing that exists in nature and acts like this to some degree. I mean, how plausible is it? You obviously have experience with cordyceps at your current job, so That's a lot, but I'm just going to throw it to you.
It is a conversation that we have had at work, and my scientific understandings of how cordyceps could react in a situation like that are limited, since my actual experience is more so on the end of extracting components to make medicine with it. But as far as that goes, even if it were possible somehow, one thing that I think that we would see is that I don't think that it would be solely subjective to human beings. If it's happening to a mammal, it would make more sense that that is occurring to all of them. And that was one thing that was brought up many times, like as through watching this show, is like, how come the monkeys aren't infected, or like even the giraffes? Like we're seeing these, dogs, even horses. It would only make sense that if cordyceps had the ability to actually infect a mammal, that it would not just be humans. It does definitely make for a more interesting story to have it be just that, from what we've seen at least so far in the show. So just as far as that goes, again, I think just going off of the more science fiction aspect of it, it makes sense that if you have a cordyceps infected creature that is coming towards you, that it's going to be running quick, because one thing that cordyceps itself is known for as a supplement is that it's very energizing. It's used by some companies to even be used as like a pregame before like working out.
That is horrifying.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That is abjectly terrifying. That because there's always the zombie question of like, well, if the flesh is decomposed, like, can they really run? You know what I mean? Like The Walking Dead, like they all just shambled. But the cordyceps effect in Last of Us, they fucking book it. So just the fact that is like rooted close to reality. Like, I wish I didn't know that. I'm glad I do, but I wish I didn't, if that makes sense.
I think if it comes down to it, we wouldn't be seeing it necessarily play out how, if it was even possible, how it plays out in the game and the show. I think it would be more similarly mirrored as to how it is in nature. And again, this is just my best educated guess, but just seeing what happens, like if like an ant is infected, then generally that is going to find a place that is good for the cordyceps to be able to spread its mycorrhizal roots. So it's going to carry the corpse of the ant or whatever insect to that point, and then from there, as it decomposes, that also becomes food for it as it starts to spread and have a bit more of a colony. But we do see that starting out from the spread of the spores. So, and I guess one point also is that cordyceps can also be something that is grown without insects, and that is the type that we use in the lab, or else it would be even more expensive than it already is, because it's the most expensive mushroom that we do work with.
So is cordyceps a specific type of fungus, or is it classification of a variety of?
It's considered a specific type of fungus, but then you do have specific strains. Like, so the lab-grown cordyceps is the Cordyceps militaris strain, and I can't recall off the top of my head, like the one that you would just find in the wild, like literally growing off an insect. There are some people who do actually cultivate that kind. But,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, not us.
There's some ethical questions there, huh? Oh gosh. That's uncomfy. Yeah, it's an interesting conceit. Like, a lot of people are very quick on the internet to say, infected, they're not zombies, okay? Whatever, they're zombies, right?
They're fucking zombies.
But the conceit is interesting. Whenever you can root science fiction, like the more you can root it in reality, or at least a layman's understanding of reality, that only serves your story and your world building, right? So
that's why I think Andor is the most interesting Star Wars story. Maybe one of the most interesting Star Wars stories ever told, because it's rooted in reality.
Except for The Last Jedi, perhaps.
Stop!
One of the most.
Cross it off the bingo list. It's off the board.
Rotten Tomatoes would disagree with Chris.
Yeah, most people.
No, the fuck it wouldn't. No, the fuck it would not.
Actually, I was thinking of Star Wars earlier because we were talking about nonlinear storylines and how we get, the middle three first, and imagine a world where Star Wars came out in order. That just is gross. No.
I'm sure we would have gotten 3 good movies out of it anyway. Although it depends on who you ask, right, Nick?
Even the original trilogy is like 2.5 good movies.
Yeah, well, okay, hey, that is more than I thought I would ever get out of you. I'll take 2.5. I like that.
So I'm hearing trilogy rewatch at the beach.
Oh my God.
God.
we have 2.5 days together. Let's spend half of that time watching movies.
No, we're gonna be playing Plock. We're gonna be playing Plock. That's what we're gonna be doing at the beach.
All right.
Anyway,
all right.
I digress.
All right. Back to The Last of Us.
The plot thickens.
Oh my God. I hate that.
So I would like to know from our esteemed guests. So we've got the whole season. You've got the whole story of the first part of The Last of Us as it has been adapted for television. What are your thoughts overall on this piece of media we have now consumed in its entirety?
So I loved it. I think it was overall well executed. One thing that I thought was interesting that I learned about is that Bella Ramsey's character, so she actually had come into starting to do her acting with this show after Pedro Pascal had done his scenes for, I think they were filming like the first part of episode 1. I just saw it in a way, he was like talking about how like that took her a little bit longer to have a chance to kind of like warm up to things while he had already had this time to like be on the set and like have a good idea of how things were being ran. And in a way, you almost kind of see that reflected in a little bit with her character and her acting throughout the show as she warms up to things. But I also feel like it worked really well for the show itself. And in a lot of ways kind of reminds me just of like, you know, my own path growing up like as a teenager, and you're feeling your way through the world. And then, you know, there's definitely some moments where maybe how she's acting feels forced, but I think that played true to the character, and that's how a teenager would be acting, especially when they are out on their own for the first time, away from everything that they've ever known. And maybe they want to act a little bit tough and like put on that facade in order to feel like they can be a little bit more respected by somebody who continuously is referring to you as cargo. So I really enjoyed that. And then just to see the progression of it. And I had the opportunity to go back through and watch at least 3, if not 4, of the first episodes. And one thing that I really picked up on that I hadn't as much the first time around was some of the more subtle, to me at least, ways that Joel's character had acted, reflections of his emotions that I really enjoyed. When I'd first watched it, it was hard to pick up on those things, and it almost felt like maybe that was how Ellie's character also viewed him to an extent. But then to actually see these like subtle nuances of his character and reactions that he'd had kind of come through, I think that like Pedro Pascal just did an awesome job with actually acting through those moments where not a lot is really being said or shown, but if you look, the emotions are there. So I think that was just really excellently done. I loved the also just like artistic direction of the show, I think was really great. I did hear some feedback from friends in the Myco community, if you will, that they're like, well, it was just cordyceps that they'd been infected with, and they had like reishi and other things coming off them. And
No.
I saw some red-belted conch and yeah,
This is A+ content. This is better than we have any right to have on this show. I'm sorry. Like, that's so fucking tight.
So they weren't faithful in their fungus design? Is that what I'm hearing?
that's what you're hearing.
Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
But as far as that goes, at the same time, I think that it was a good direction to go. It's not to say that if you have a piece of substrate that is good enough quality for one type of fungus to infect it, that you're not going to have something else come in as well. And so that's always something to consider. Whether or not they could cohabitate with each other well is another question, but it comes down to it being kind of a, you know, science fiction type of thing anyways. And I really enjoyed how everything looked, even when Tess and Joel are walking through like an underground sewer part and they come across one of the infected cordyceps that was kind of splayed out on the wall, and they were like, no, this one's done. Just seeing like everything that had been pieced together for that, I just have to really give a just clap on the back to the special effects team that created those pieces, because it was really stunning and looked really realistic. So I enjoyed that as well. But those were definitely some of the main things that overall just kind of came through the most for me with this show. But it definitely was a great watch. I found myself looking forward to, you know, sitting down and watching the episode each Sunday with Nick. So sounds like now we're going to have to move on to Andor in order to have another good show to move on to.
Looking forward to and dreading, because after the first episode, you had nightmares, I remember. And we decided that we had to have a show to like unwind with to sort of like calm things down before bed, because we go to bed pretty early to get up in the morning.
Thank you, Agretzko.
And you dream about mushrooms already, so this was just like augmenting it in a horrific and disgusting way, I'm sure. Before I give it to Tiffany, I just have to say, we all heard Lindsay say, that's how teenagers behave. That's how teenagers talk. And I just wanted that on record for you, EJ, before I give it over to Tiffany.
Tiff, give me 1 sec. I'm sorry here. There are moments. Listen, I'll keep it brief. I promise I'd behave. There are moments where, wow, that's a teenager. And there are moments where it was a little stilted. And part of that was also the writing's fault. So listen, it's not all, you can't just sweepingly generalize here as a gotcha.
Got
here.
one on the line. It's a biggin.
All right, Tiffany, what were your thoughts about this 9-week journey we've all been on?
I think it was a good movie. Like, what was the episode length? 9-part movie. I think that's a good show. I think that's what I'm finding about TV that I like a lot is if it thinks of itself as a movie in the season and then breaks it into those 30-minute or whatever hour-long episodes, which we don't really have to stick to anymore. And I really like that Andor and Disney in general. Hey, this is a shout out to Disney. You should like me again, Disney. That what I like about what they're doing with their streaming is they don't care about episode length. I love that. I think it's great. It breaks my brain free of a stupid limit that existed because of commercials, and we don't have that anymore, thank God. Well, except for Hulu. Fuck you, Hulu. So now I have Hulu on my back.
They're owned by Disney. Be careful.
Oh shit! Sorry, Disney. Oh God.
Goodbye, sponsorship.
But I'm going to censor the D word every time we hear it in this podcast.
It's just like a sound from like Mickey Mouse going, ha ha.
Yeah.
What stands out to me from this season, I really like hearing what stood out to you, Lindsay, because it's like so different from what stood out to me. And I think that's because of our different experiences of like what we are doing in our work. And that makes me excited for the show because I think it reaches out to so many different groups. I'm interested to know who in my circles now likes it, A lot of my friends that liked it because it was so, pride friendly. It was so LGBTQ friendly. And to me, the episodes that really stand out are the episode with, help me with names, Chris.
Bill and Frank's Excellent Adventure.
Yes, Bill and Frank.
Hey, they got their happy ending.
It did in multiple ways.
Wow.
Sorry. And then there was Henry and Sam, episode 5. I was just thinking about, as you were talking about the cordyceps, like the big giant one. What's that called? The bloat?
The bloater.
Yeah, the bloater. Like,
I call it the boomer.
The boomer. The bloater boomer. The bloomer.
Okay, boomer.
The late bloomer. That character, wow. Like, I think that's why the end of it feels like that's it, because we saw such extreme stuff in some of those middle episodes that they, it didn't go in the hero's journey arc where the climax or the battle there where you get the reward didn't really happen for us. So I think our brains are like, what? Aren't we supposed to hear you play Coco to your grandma now? No, that's not what happens. We leave with questions, and that's annoying, but I kind of like being annoyed because it disturbs my brain a little bit from the comfortable storylines we've always been fed. So I think overall, yeah, the show is just fantastically acted. I guess I haven't mentioned anything about being an actor. It's really well acted because the script is good. That's a big part of it. It's hard to act a bad script. I've only ever seen John Goodman do that in Speed Racer. And it's just, I think it's a good script. That's first of all. Then second of all, these actors have a good bond. So they spent some time obviously bonding. And then the last thing really is that everybody in this show is specific and, well, most of the folks. There's a couple of random small roles that are like, okay, they're probably regularly these small role actors and they're not as specific as they should be. But I think like a lot of these performances they have an imagination engaged with the story as opposed to acting an idea. And a lot of bad acting is acting an idea. Like I want to play this idea of sadness, or I want to play this idea of John Wick or whatever. I don't know. I haven't seen those movies yet. But action star, that's bad acting. Good acting is, I want something really bad from this other character, and here's all the things I'm going to do it. And I think everybody in the show is acting with their partner. They're not acting on their own, except for those random small characters where they probably filmed the scene without a real actor on the other side. And that's partly on the industry's fault. Like, just put the goddamn real actor there on the other side for once.
This was filmed during the pandemic, right? Like early pandemic. This was like early 2020, mid 2020.
It wasn't that early, was it?
I thought it was like started around that time. Well, no? Okay. So maybe I'm just misremembering.
I mean, they're still dealing with restrictions and, union rules that were set in place because of COVID, but yeah.
I did want to say one more thing about it being a really good game to adapt based on what I've observed, because I have seen some clips with Chris. I think it's unfair to like the Mario Bros. Back in the day. The upcoming one I'm really excited about, but the old Mario Bros, who did they make that for?
Me.
This show knows who the audience is. And like the old Mario Bros, I don't know if they knew who their audience was, and the same with Ghost in the Shell. I don't know.
They made it for me. That's who they made the 80s Mario Bros. For. And I am going to now insist, now that I know that at least one of the other 5 people at the beach for that weekend fuck with the Bob Hoskins, God rest him, and John Leguizamo Mario. We are absolutely watching that. And it's perfectly appropriate. It fucks so hard.
So weird.
Did it fucks?
Yeah, it fucks so hard. So we're gonna watch that, and we're absolutely gonna do a I'm putting this on the air. We're going to do a Mario Bros. Movie ×2 live response featuring
Why
the
not,
group
dude?
chat.
Make it a weekend.
Featuring the group chat. We're going to respond to both Mario Bros. Films.
All right. Compare and contrast. Well, it is a good point. Like, and we've brought it up a little bit early on about like, it's not exactly easy to adapt when you think of what a video game is. The Last of Us sort of pioneered this idea of a video game, which is just, like you said, I guess just TV with some gameplay elements, interspersed. So it's easy to adapt something that is already crafted like its show. Adapting Crash Bandicoot is difficult. Adapting, obviously adapting Mario is quite difficult. So it's sort of, games became more like this thing that we've had for a lot of years. You're really not adapting a video game per se. You're adapting a very long film. And what they have adapted from the game itself, as far as gameplay goes, it's just Easter eggs. They're not things that are integral to the plot. And so that's when there's this discourse about like, oh, is the curse broken? And it's like, no, like we're still not going to get like a good Tetris movie or whatever the fuck. You know what I mean? Like,
it's coming to Apple TV,
cool.
Coming to Apple TV, starring Taron Egerton. The story of getting Tetris like placed on every NES console at launch as a package game.
That's not what I meant, Chris. Obviously.
I know it's not what you meant, but I just want you to put some respect on Tetris starring Taron Egerton coming from Apple TV. I'm interested in that movie. Nick, thoughts on the full season?
Overall, I thought it was good. I early on made the bold proclamation that it was easily better than the game, mostly because I did not mesh well with the gameplay. So I was like, oh, these cutscenes are great, but everything else is like mid. So this being all cutscenes because it's a TV show improved it dramatically for me.
Fair.
And yeah, like the sort of like less interesting parts weren't that bad, and the great parts were great. So overall, I had a good time, and like it doesn't matter that Kathleen was really just a really bad. Why did they make that addition? Like, it's like the only thing really of substance that they added from the game. Like, everything else is just like little bits of seasoning. And this is like a thing that was not in the game at all. And they made that decision. Why? It was just bad. Like, fleshing out Sam and Henry was seasoning, and it was great seasoning, and it made that much more impactful. And doing a little twist on David as a character. And then, like, they do vignettes so well that it makes me excited when there's a cold open. Maybe I think that the Ashley Johnson cold open was like okay, and it felt a little bit too cute especially for the final episode to open with that. And then to be robbed of more pacing, like more slow moments later in the episode, it felt like it could have been better. Like they could have used that time more effectively, spending it with Joel and Ellie, which is like what a lot of the sort of flashback sequences end up being throughout the season. Like Left Behind was really poorly done, and it felt more like, here we have to do this, so we're going to do it, and we're not doing it very well. Even like the Bill and Frank episode, like I loved that episode. I thought it was great, and it really did reflect well on the characters and that having not necessarily plot relevance, but just like character growth relevance. And that was a good choice. But then Kathleen was a bad choice. So it's like they do good things, but they also are capable of doing bad things. And that gives EJ anxiety. And it gives me like, oh, I'm just rolling the dice and we'll see what we're getting this episode. And it's usually pretty good.
There were a lot of really great things in a vacuum about this entire season. I think overall it was a little bit disjointed. It was pretty well adapted, but I texted this to you, Chris, the other day. It kind of felt like it was just one long montage of the game. I never felt like I really had enough time with anybody in any one moment because they were doing, a lot with the show and expanding a lot of these side characters. And that's, Nick, you said they do vignettes really well. And I agree. Like, I hope season 2, I mean, it's got plenty of opportunity to do more vignette sort of things and let things breathe. But I felt like we lingered too long in sort of some weird areas and not enough time in a lot of these other very character-driven moments that I wanted. So it's disjointed in that aspect. It was disjointed, like, tonally. Like, I mean, think about it. We've seen Infected twice in the last 5 episodes. This is obviously a very character-driven story. It's not about the horror of the world. That is just a backdrop for this very human story, and that's fine. But like, this started off as a very different show than it ended. And some of that is due to the game, and like obviously a lot of what makes the game feel more consistent tonally is like those gameplay moments. You can't just cut away from the story to go like kill a bunch of clickers for an hour. But there are moments they could have brought that in. So that felt a little inconsistent. So overall, I'm like, I said in the last episode, I thought this was like a pretty properly executed show that I probably have some unreasonable gripes with just because I have high expectations. And those only grow week to week when I can't just sit down and sort of absorb something like a 9-hour movie, which I would prefer to do over the course of 2 days instead of 9 weeks. But it was very well acted. Again, script inconsistent. It's just there's a lot to take away here, hoping for season 2 and probably 3 and who knows what else.
Not probably.
And there are
3.
There will be 2 seasons for the next game at least.
At least.
But there were a lot of stumbles here that they can learn from, and I hope that they do. I texted in the group chat yesterday about how part 2 is a very controversial game for a lot of bad and some good reasons. And, we have one showrunner who has shown a lack of, I don't want to say respect for the community, but like he sort of lumps all the community voices in with a lot of, this horrendous minority. And so he has this sort of attitude of like, well, I don't give a fuck. Like I'm going to do what I'm going to do. And sometimes it feels like maybe he does and says things that are like just to like stick it to the angry fans, which I don't think always serves the art. So that has me a little worried. And we have another showrunner who definitely showed that he wanted to put his mark on things. And I think sometimes that felt a little masturbatory. Not all the time. There were a lot of great changes. There were a lot of great insights they expanded upon. But there were definitely those moments where it was like, all right, this is so-and-so having fun. And again, I don't know if that always served the show, both tonally and like, from a pacing perspective. So yeah, I thought it was a solid show. I'm glad it exists. And I'm quite worried about what happens in part 2, but I'm excited that it will be happening. And I hope that they take the opportunity to maybe right some wrongs, however minor they are in your estimation, Chris.
Always so hyperbolic. Only a Sith deals in absolutes. And you make some good points, and I don't need to nitpick anything we haven't already nitpicked. It's an A- show for me. I think that I'm closest to you, Nick, when you say what it does well. It does very fucking well. And the floor for this show, for speaking in terms of like the low points, are still better than a lot of the shows, if not most of the shows that are on television. And whether that's due to the source material or the execution of the source material doesn't matter, because that's still the product that we saw. I think that I think I share your sentiment here with regards to Infected, and specifically, of course, we've joked a lot about like don't do the thing Chris says his students shouldn't do, which is like say what you would have done. But we've talked a lot and agreed that winter section we would have really liked to have a little more time with for a lot of reasons. Would have been great to see a little more of Ellie subsisting, a little bit more time for this like Joel injury to have a little more weight and seriousness, a little bit more time to get to know David and to trust David in the way that we do in the game, that we don't get the opportunity to in the show, because the first time he meets Ellie, it's got to be, oh, and you killed our homies, so we're going to come fuck up your boy. And an Infected sequence would have been a great fucking way to do that. And I get that it's winter, and then it poses the zombies in winter question that every zombie show like skirts around every time they have an opportunity to do so because they don't want to talk about it. Sure, they probably would have been cold and harder to move or whatever, but what say you go into a house looking for something and oh shit, next to the radiator or whatever, I don't give a fuck. Like there's an Infected. That would have been a great obstacle for Ellie to overcome in her journey as the caretaker to Joel in those moments. And I think that would have been a great way, instead of getting like a half-baked Left Behind adaptation that we get for most of an episode, to get that interspersed, or to kick the can on that down into season 2 into a time at which it would make more sense. Let me wrap up my takes. Damn.
I'm sorry, my hand looks.
Is everybody okay over there?
Yeah, we're fine.
We had a lot of Bud Light seltzers.
Yeah, we did some to celebrate the episode. To celebrate this show, we did some mushrooms before we started recording.
That's not true.
That's not true. That's not true. I would have.
We're not even watching Akira right now.
Ha 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 ha! He's got jokes. Ha 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 ha. I still haven't finished that. I would like to, but now I'm like, every time I see it on Crunchyroll when we're going to load up, like we're watching Mob Psycho 100. We just started that, which is so fucking funny and weird. I see Akira and I'm just like,
I don't want to take it from you, but I do want to, because I just want to say, I don't think this is like one of the greatest shows of all time. I think Pedro Pascal does a great performance. I think he always kind of does. And I'm probably a little bit biased because I think he's attractive, but like, I think he does a good job, and Brad Pitt's attractive, but he doesn't always do a good job. So it's not just that. But there's also there's just such great TV out there. Like this doesn't rank on the same level as Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad or Barry. It's a good show, but it's not top tier.
Well, you're talking about generational television with Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, like literally like epochal TV shows that defined that era of television.
Absolutely.
So like I never expected The Last of Us to touch that. I thought if this was a good to great show, it has done and exceeded its job. And yes, EJ, I know we joke and like, oh, the adaptation curse. That is the perception, fair or unfair. And this show has broken that perception. Again, fair or unfair, that should it exist in the first place. It could win some hardware. It could legitimately win some hardware in award season. I think like production design is a field that it is rife to win an Emmy or a Golden Globe for 100%. Costumes and makeup, absolutely.
Hella costume makeup, yes.
Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey will absolutely be nominated for leading actor and actress in a featured role. Or not a featured role, in a leading role. Absolutely, both of them will be nominated for the week of the show. And I think that a number of the folks in like, what's his name? Nick Offerman, 100% could get nominated for actor in a featured role for his work in episode 3, and rightfully so. And it'd be great for him to get that recognition. I think it's rife with opportunity for them to win a bunch of awards, be a something nice on the mantle for HBO that could incentivize them, hopefully, to do other stuff. And in the meantime, let's hope that God of War on Amazon and BioShock on Netflix, God help us, continue this trend of doing this well, and that investors are like, you know what? I think we can make some money out of this. I think it could be done well. And also, EJ, to throw it way back in the episode to your point about, look at Troy Baker, look at Ashley Johnson turning in like really good performances. Christopher Judge as Kratos. Give me that Michael Jackson looking motherfucker.
They're gonna have to do a lot of work to undo all the years of plastic surgery that man has had.
It's just he's gonna be ashy white with red accents anyway. Like, who cares? It doesn't matter.
You probably make a good point. Well, I'm looking at the clock and realize we're really butting up on our time limit here. But I gotta say, 5 people. This was a lot more, amicable than I would have, guessed going into it. Chris and I could sit here yelling at each other for another 2 hours if we really, really wanted
3
to.
at least.
Which I appreciate about our relationship, Chris. And we just make Nick suffer through it. He just wants to sit here and make some cogent argument, and we're just like, no, but The Last Jedi!
Nick Switzerland, and we love him for it.
Just one cogent thought.
Any final parting thoughts before we sign off here?
I'm just glad we got to talk about a TV show on this podcast. And EJ, when you sent the text that you were like, oh my God, we could talk about TV on this video game podcast. I was like, holy shit, we can talk about TV on this video game podcast. Give me a chance to talk about something I'm actually good at, which is to say acting and directing as opposed to video games, which I am on record as being terrible at, generally speaking. So this was just a good ass time. And hopefully when BioShock and God of War come out, like, goddamn, we could do it again.
Fingers crossed those shows are going to... Well, it doesn't matter if they're worth talking about because we're going to talk about them because it is prestige television and this is a video game podcast.
I think this being a very watchable show made it a lot better to talk about. Like, if those come out and it's like one episode and it's like
the Halo show, yeah.
It's not on Paramount Plus. So it's actually like a service we all like are willing to participate in.
Yeah.
I think that helps.
It's been something that I've looked forward to with you fellas every week, and it was very nice to hear from you, Lindsay and Tiffany. And hopefully this is something that we can do again as it pertains to television.
Hey, we're knee deep in Return to Dreamland Deluxe, man. So we got takes.
I'm still trying to convince Sarah to play the last Kirby game with me.
I just play Bandana Waddle Dee. I don't know what he thinks I'm going to have to offer about it.
That's fair.
Yeah, I appreciate, as a longtime listener, appreciate being on the other side here.
I'm so sorry for that, by the way.
By choice.
But we appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was nice. I appreciate getting the invite to come on, and yeah, maybe I'll pop in the future for another guest spot, maybe a little indie spotlight or something, because that tends to be my jam. So yeah, but thanks for having me on and getting to share my thoughts. It's been fun.
My favorite part of the night, when I get to mute EJ.
It's been a long time coming.
He didn't even get
Sometimes
to hear
I
that.
think...
He has no idea what I'm
no,
saying.
I can still hear Chris right now. I can still hear this motherfucker because I haven't muted him yet. Fuck you, Chris.